Have you ever felt like you're just drowning in information? Needing to quickly grasp a complex topic without getting totally lost in the weeds.
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there.
Right. You want to be well informed, but the sheer volume, it's overwhelming sometimes. Well, today we're really digging into an exciting breakthrough in AI. Specifically, how large language models, LLMs, process information.
Yeah, there's some fascinating new work.
We're doing a deep dive into this new approach called dynamic chunking for end-to-end hierarchical sequence modeling.
Sounds technical, but the core idea is pretty revolutionary.
It comes from a really interesting research paper by Sujun Kwang, Brandon Wang, and Albert Gu. And our goal here is basically to pull out the essential nuggets, the stuff you really need to know about this. Okay, so let's unpack this. You're probably familiar, at least vaguely, with how LLMs handle text.
Right, the standard way.
They typically break it down into these tiny pieces, often called tokens. It happens through a process called tokenization.
Yeah, it's like pre-chopping all your ingredients before you even start cooking.
Exactly. But what if that pre-chopping, while it seems helpful, is actually limiting what the model can truly learn?
Well, what's really interesting here is that while tokenization seems, indispensable, it actually comes with a whole host of well-documented drawbacks.
Drawbacks, like what?
Think of it as a barrier to true end-to-end learning. For instance, it can lead to poor character level understanding.
Right, because it's looking at word chunks, not letters.
Exactly. And a lack of maybe deeper meaning and interpretability, plus significantly degraded performance, especially in complex languages.
Okay.
Or even other data types, like, say, DNA sequences where words don't really exist.
So what does this all mean for, how these models work?
Essentially, our current LLMs aren't truly end-to-end.
Because of this pre-processing step.
Precisely. They rely on this handcrafted, predefined tokenization. And that kind of goes against what's known as the bitter lesson in deep learning.
The bitter lesson. Remind me.
It's the observation that over the long haul, simpler, more scalable methods that learn directly from raw data with minimal human engineering often outperform complex human-designed systems.
Okay, got it. Learn from the raw stuff.
Which raises the question, why do we still use tokenization then?
Yeah, if it has these issues.
Well, historically, it's been absolutely crucial. It compresses and shortens sequences, making the computation manageable for these massive models.
The practical side.
Right. Getting rid of it means tackling some really serious technical challenges, like the prohibitive computational costs if you try to model directly at the byte level.
It's too much data.
Way too much. Or the poor performance you get from simple fixed chunking strategies. People have tried dynamic chunking before, but
They hit roadblocks.
yeah, they just struggled with stability, couldn't get them to scale up reliably.
So the idea has been floating around, but making it work reliably at scale, that's been the sticking point.
Exactly. And this is precisely where HNet changes the game.
Okay, here we go. This is where it gets really interesting. The paper introduces this hierarchical network, or HNet, and its core innovation is something they call dynamic chunking, or DC.
And this is their answer, a pretty elegant one, to completely replacing that traditional tokenization pipeline we just talked about.
So ditching the pre-chopping altogether.
Right. If you connect this to the bigger picture, HNet basically aims to learn how to segment data automatically.
Based on the data itself.
Exactly, in a way that's content and context dependent rather than relying on fixed rules somebody came up with.
And so it's actually end-to-end.
Truly end-to-end. It learns the chunking process jointly with everything else the model does.
Okay, help me visualize this. How does it work? They use an analogy in the paper, right?
Yeah, they sort of relate it to a UNet, which you might know from image processing.
Right, those handle fine details and broader structures by sort of zooming in and out.
Exactly. HNet does something similar, but for sequences, like text. It processes the raw data, maybe byte level, with a small encoder network.
Okay.
Then it downsamples it, compresses it into these learned chunks.
Learned chunks, not predefined tokens.
Correct. And these compressed chunks are then fed into a bigger main network for the heavy-duty processing.
And then?
Finally, a decoder network upsamples the result back to the original resolution, like predicting the next byte or character.
So the outer parts handle the fine-grained stuff, and the inner part works on more abstract, compressed representations.
Precisely. Kind of like traditional tokens in concept, but crucially, they are learned by the model itself from the data.
And the main network operates on the compressed stuff.
Yes, and that's key. The main network, which holds most of the model's parameters, the really big part, operates on these shorter, compressed sequences.
Which saves compute.
A lot of compute. It allows for much larger, more powerful main networks within the same computational budget. It's very efficient.
And it's modular. You mentioned it could be nested.
Yeah, the design is quite flexible. The main network itself could be another HNet, so you can stack them, creating multiple stages of dynamic chunking for even more refined abstraction.
Wow, okay. So how does HNet actually decide where to put those chunk boundaries? It's not magic, right?
Not magic, no. It uses a couple of clever techniques and a smart loss function to guide the learning.
All right, break it down for us.
Okay, at the core is this novel dynamic chunking, the DC mechanism. First, there's a routing module.
Routing, like deciding where things go.
Sort of. It predicts potential boundaries by measuring the similarity between adjacent bits of data, the representations it's learned.
Ah, so if the meaning or context shifts.
Exactly, like moving from one word to the next or maybe a punctuation mark, the similarity between the representations tends to drop.
And that signals a possible boundary.
That signals a natural place to potentially make a cut, yeah. It's like the model learns to hear the natural pauses and shifts in meaning within the data stream.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that making these hard cuts, these discrete boundary decisions, can be tricky for learning. It's either a boundary or it's not, right? How do they handle that?
You're right, that discreteness is a problem for gradient-based learning. That's where the second key piece comes in, the smoothing module.
Smoothing?
Yeah. It essentially transforms these sharp, discrete boundary decisions into something more continuous, something differentiable. That allows the learning signals, the gradients, to flow back through the network effectively during training.
So it softens the edges somehow.
Kind of. If the model isn't very confident about whether a specific point should be a boundary, the smoothing module blends the representation at that point with the previous chunk. It acts like a self-correcting mechanism.
Ah, so if it's unsure, it hedges its bets a bit.
Pretty much. And this significantly improves the learnability and, crucially, the stability of the whole process.
That's incredibly clever. So it's not just a binary yes-no on the boundary, but it learns confidence and smooths things out when it's uncertain. Okay, so we have rooting and smoothing. What else?
Well, once you have these compressed chunks, you eventually need to get back to the original detail level, right? So there's also an upsampler.
For store the compressed vectors.
Yes. And it uses some neat tricks to make this work well during training. Things like a straight-through estimator, or STE.
Just a technical detail to help.
Basically, yeah. It helps stabilize the gradients, even though the underlying chunking decisions are quite sharp. And there's also something called causal expansion to make sure information flows correctly. You don't want future data influencing past chunking decisions.
Right, got to keep causality intact. Okay, this sounds very adaptable. But what stops the model from just, say, chunking every single byte or making massive chunks that lose all the detail? Is there a control?
Good question. That's managed by a specific ratio loss function.
A ratio loss?
Yeah, it's an auxiliary loss, an extra guiding signal during training. It's inspired by techniques like load balancing used in other big AI models. It basically encourages the model to aim for a certain target compression ratio.
So you can roughly tell it, aim for compressing the data by 10x, for example.
Exactly. It stops the model from making trivial choices, like keeping almost everything, which isn't efficient, or compressing so much that it loses critical information. It ensures that compression is both efficient and content adaptive. This loss function turns out to be really important for making it work well.
Okay, so the dynamic chunking itself is sophisticated. But you mentioned earlier attempts struggled with scaling and stability. Did they do anything else to the overall HNet architecture to fix that?
They did. Beyond the core chunking mechanism, they made some really smart, maybe less flashy but critical tweaks to the overall design.
Like what? Give us an example. You mentioned norm balance earlier.
Right, norm balance. This was about adding normalization layers at the end of each component network, the encoder, the mainnet, the decoder.
Why is that so important?
Well, in these hierarchical setups, as information flows from the fine-grained outer layers to the more abstract inner layers and back out, signals can get amplified or diminished. Fine details from early on can get totally washed out by stronger signals from deeper processing.
Losing the nuance.
Exactly. Norm balance helps keep the signal strength consistent across the different stages, preventing this information loss and making the whole training process much more stable. It seems simple, but it's vital for deep hierarchies.
Makes sense. Any other key tweaks?
They also carefully refined the separation of two streams, how information flows between different parts, deciding precisely where to add certain mathematical operations, projections, to keep the gradients flowing optimally. Very important for learning efficiency.
Okay.
And finally, they used learning rate modulation. Basically, they gave higher learning rates to the outer stages, the encoder and decoder, which process the longer, uncompressed sequences.
Why do that?
It helps the model learn the chunking mechanism itself much faster because those outer layers are directly involved in figuring out the boundaries on the raw data, so it accelerates the whole learning process. These might sound like engineering details, but they were pivotal in making HNet succeed where prior attempts kind of stumbled.
Right, the combination of the core idea and these careful engineering choices. So the million-dollar question, how well does this HNet actually perform? They tested it, right?
Oh yeah, rigorously. Against standard transformers, the kind most people use, and other models that try to work directly on bytes.
What did they find?
The results are pretty compelling. When they matched the compute power and the amount of training data, a single stage HNet, just one level of chunking, operating directly at the byte level, outperformed a strong transformer language model that used traditional BPE tokens.
Outperformed, even though the transformer had the benefit of tokenization.
Yes. That's a really significant finding. It shows that a tokenizer-free model can finally match and even beat the performance of models that rely on those handcrafted tokens.
Wow. Okay. That's a big step. And what about the two-stage HNet you mentioned with the nested structure?
Even better results there. Adding that second stage of hierarchy, allowing the model to learn another level of abstraction, further boosted performance.
How much better?
The two-stage HNet showed significantly better scaling with data. It actually managed to match the performance of a token-based transformer that was twice its size in terms of parameters.
Twice its size. That's huge.
It is. And at the really large XL scale they tested, the two-stage HNet overtook the tokenized transformer after seeing only about 30 billion training bytes. And the performance gap just kept widening after that.
That is remarkably data efficient, getting better results, faster, with less data, essentially.
Exactly. Better scaling properties.
Okay, raw performance is great, but what about other benefits? Things that you or I might notice when interacting with such a model.
This is where it gets really interesting, too. The HNets they pre-trained on English showed dramatically increased character-level robustness. Meaning they were much better at handling things like typos, misspellings, or even text with all the spaces removed.
Ah, things that completely throw off traditional tokenizers.
Precisely, because a standard tokenizer sees hello and hello or hello as totally different, unrelated tokens. HNet, working closer to the character level, is much less brittle.
And it learned this naturally.
Yes, this robustness emerged without any special tricks like adding noisy data during training or specific augmentations. It seems to imply a more fundamental, deeper understanding of language structure rather than just memorizing token patterns.
And that's the crucial takeaway here for you, the listener.
Yeah.
This means these models aren't just memorizing word pieces. They seem to be truly understanding the underlying characters and how they form words, even when those words are a bit messed up. That feels like a huge shift.
It really does. And tied into that is the interpretability. When they visualized what the model was actually doing, how it was chunking.
What did they see?
It was fascinating. The visualizations revealed that HNet automatically learns meaningful, semantically coherent chunking strategies, all on its own.
Like what, for example?
Well, the one-stage HNet, the simpler one, naturally learned to place chunk boundaries mostly at white spaces.
So kind of reinventing word separation.
Exactly, mirroring what human-designed tokenizers often do. But the two-stage HNet went deeper.
How so?
It learned to combine those space-like boundaries with maybe the first few characters of the next word. And sometimes it would even merge multiple related words, like the backbone or such as, into a single semantic group, a single chunk.
And it figured this out entirely from the data. No rules.
No explicit heuristics, no supervision telling it these words go together. It just emerged from the learning process.
That's incredible. Okay, this sounds amazing for English, but what about languages that are really different? Or even data that isn't language at all?
That's another area where HNet really shines, actually. The improvements seem even more pronounced where traditional tokenization heuristics are weakest.
Like Chinese, maybe. which doesn't use spaces like English.
Exactly like Chinese. HNet significantly outperformed both a standard tokenized transformer using the pretty advanced Llama 3 tokenizer and also variants of HNet that were forced to use spaces.
So it just looked at the raw Chinese characters and figured out meaningful ways to group them better than the standard methods.
It seems so, based purely on the patterns in the data.
Wow. What about code?
Code has lots of white space, but also this hidden, latent hierarchical structure, right? Loops inside functions, etc. HNet showed strong gains there, too.
Okay, code makes sense. But the really striking one you mentioned earlier was DNA.
Yes, DNA sequences. This is maybe the ultimate test case because DNA lacks any obvious tokenization cues. It's just a long string of A, C, G, and T.
Right, no words, no spaces.
And here, the one-stage HNet showed nearly a 4 times improvement in data efficiency compared to standard models that process the sequence uniformly.
4 times, meaning it reached the same performance level using only a quarter of the training data.
Roughly, yes. Which is a massive improvement, especially when dealing with huge biological data sets.
That strongly suggests HNet isn't just a language model trick. It's potentially a truly general sequence modeling architecture.
That's the implication. It seems adaptable to almost any kind of raw sequential data, not just human language. That's a potential game changer.
Definitely. Did the researchers dig into why certain parts of HNet were so important, like those ablation studies you mentioned?
They did extensive ablation studies, yes, trying to understand which components were most critical.
What did they find?
One key finding was that the smoothing module, the bit that handles the uncertainty and boundary decisions, is absolutely essential for stable training.
What happens without it?
Without it, the models just struggled. They couldn't learn consistent chunking boundaries. The training becomes too rigid, too brittle, and often fails to converge properly.
So that smoothing was really a breakthrough for stability. What about the building blocks inside HNet? We hear a lot about transformers versus newer architectures like Mamba these days. Did that choice matter?
It did seem to matter quite a bit. They found that using Mamba layers was particularly beneficial for the encoder and decoder networks, the parts handling the fine-grained raw data, like bytes.
Why Mamba specifically?
Mamba has this inherent design and inductive bias that makes it really good at compressing long sequences of information into a compact, fixed-size state.
Which is exactly what you need for chunking.
Exactly. It's almost perfectly suited for the task of summarizing segments of the input stream to create these learned chunks. Interestingly, this benefit held up even when they used Mamba to process coarser inputs, like BPE tokens, in the higher stages of a multi-stage HNet.
So Mamba seems generally good at this compression task, regardless of whether it's looking at bytes or tokens.
That's what their results suggest, yes. It seems better suited for compressing information for the next stage in the hierarchy.
Interesting. Okay, one last comparison. How does HNet stack up against other approaches that try to make models more efficient, like sparse models or mixture of experts, MoE?
That's a great question. You can view HNet as a form of dynamic sparsity, because it's essentially deciding which parts of the sequence to process more intensely at the boundaries and which parts to compress.
Right, it's not processing everything uniformly.
Correct. But when they compared HNet directly to a standard MoE model with similar parameter counts and computational cost, FLOPs,
HNet came out ahead.
significantly ahead. It was much more effective. This suggests that HNet isn't just achieving sparsity in a generic way like MoE tries to do by routing tokens to different experts. It's achieving sparsity in a semantically meaningful way, tied directly to the structure of the data itself.
Because the sparsity comes from the learned chunking.
Exactly. And that meaningful structure seems to lead to much better overall scaling and performance compared to more generic sparsity methods like MoE.
Okay, that really clarifies its unique advantage. So let's try to wrap this up. We've taken quite a deep dive into HNets and this idea of dynamic chunking.
We certainly have.
And we've seen how this new architecture moves us quite a bit closer to truly end-to-end foundation models, models that learn more directly from raw data.
Right. By learning how to segment and abstract data on its own, HNet really tackles this long-standing, nagging issues with traditional tokenization.
Leading to models that seem more robust, perform better across really diverse languages, and even non-language data like DNA.
And crucially, scale more effectively, learning more efficiently from the data.
It really feels like a compelling step towards AI that learns more with less human pre-processing, less hand-holding.
Definitely less reliance on predefined rules.
So here's a thought to leave you with. If HNets show we can learn optimal ways to chunk raw byte sequences, moving beyond these human-designed tokenizers, what other fundamental, traditionally fixed pre-processing steps in AI might also be learnable?
That's a big question.
Think about areas like computer vision or audio processing, maybe even robotics. Are there analogous tokenization steps there, fixed ways we prepare data that could potentially be learned end-to-end by the model itself?
It's plausible. We often discretize or pre-process sensory data in various ways.
Exactly. So what new, maybe currently unimagined breakthroughs could that unlock if models learned those steps too? What might the future of AI look like then?
That's definitely something to think about. A shift from predefined rules to learned strategies across the board.
So keep an eye out for how these HNet style models evolve, and maybe consider how this fundamental shift could impact your own field or interests. It could be bigger than just language.